Imagine you are standing on the bridge of a very large crude carrier, a VLCC. You are commanding a vessel that is longer than the Empire State Building is tall. In the cavernous, double-hulled tanks beneath your feet sloshes 2 million barrels of raw, unrefined crude oil, recently pumped from the deserts of the Persian Gulf. Your destination is a mega-refinery in the People's Republic of China. You have just crossed the vast, deep expanse of the Indian Ocean. But to reach the South China Sea and ultimately the Chinese mainland, you cannot sail in a straight line. You must funnel your massive, sluggish, unarmored behemoth of a ship into one of the most congested, treacherous, and geostrategically terrifying strips of water on the face of the Earth. You must enter the Strait of Malacca. As you navigate south of the Malay Peninsula and north of the Indonesian island of Sumatra, the water becomes frighteningly shallow. The shipping lanes become choked with tens of thousands of fishing trawlers, container ships, and bulk carriers. As you approach the Phillips Channel, just south of Singapore, the navigable waterway shrinks. At its narrowest point, the corridor is a mere 1.5 miles wide. You are piloting the lifeblood of an industrialized superpower through a bottleneck so tight that a single collision, a single sunken ship, or a single strategically placed naval mine could paralyze the entire global economy. Now, imagine that the geopolitical temperature has reached the boiling point. A high-intensity conflict has erupted in the Western Pacific over the island of Taiwan. As your supertanker approaches the entrance to the Strait of Malacca, your radio crackles to life. It is not the local port authority. It is a transmission broadcast on standard international maritime frequencies, but the accent is unmistakably British, French, or Australian. The transmission is a warning. You are informed that a total, comprehensive maritime exclusion zone has been established across the Andaman Sea, the Strait of Malacca, the Sunda Strait, and the Lombok Strait. You are instructed by a coalition of Western naval forces to immediately cut your engines, prepare to be boarded by Allied naval special warfare operators, and alter your course away from the South China Sea. If you refuse, your multi-million-dollar vessel and its cargo of oil destined for the Chinese war machine will be treated as hostile contraband and immediately targeted for destruction. You look at your radar screen. Blocking the horizon is an impenetrable wall of steel. You see the unmistakable silhouettes of British Type 45 destroyers, French multi-mission frigates, and Australian guided missile destroyers, all operating under the watchful, unblinking eyes of P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft circling overhead. The trap has been sprung. The free world has not sailed its fleets into the teeth of the Chinese anti-ship missile network in the Pacific. Instead, they have stayed thousands of miles away, completely out of range, and they have simply reached out and placed a tourniquet around the jugular vein of the Chinese Communist Party. They are cutting off the fuel. And the clock on the survival of the adversaries' empire has just started ticking. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a deep-dive forensic analysis into the ultimate civilization-altering trump card held by the Western Alliance, the Distant Blockade. Here is the thesis for this episode. You do not need to win a bloody, multi-trillion-dollar war of attrition against the world's largest navy if you can simply turn off their engines from 3,000 miles away. In the 21st century, the deadliest weapon is not a hypersonic glide vehicle or a nuclear stealth bomber. The deadliest weapon is a severed supply chain. If you are beginning to understand why the true balance of global power is not decided by who has the most tanks, but by the brutal, unsentimental mathematics of energy consumption, maritime geography, and logistical choke points, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the cinematic illusions of combat to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually fights, starves, and defeats its adversaries. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For the last 20 years, the media and defense analysts have been paralyzed by the fear of China's anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, missile bubbles. We have obsessed over how the United States Navy could possibly fight its way into the first island chain to liberate Taiwan or defend the Philippines. We assumed that the West would have to play by Beijing's rules, fighting a kinetic war directly on China's doorstep. That assumption is fundamentally wrong. We are going to break down the geography of starvation, the brutal reality of the Malacca Dilemma, and why the Chinese military is mathematically incapable of fighting a protracted war without seaborne oil. We are going to explore the Australian anvil, how the massive military expansion of the remote Cocos Islands is turning the eastern Indian Ocean into an inescapable kill zone for Chinese submarines. We will analyze the NATO hammer, why European navies are deploying heavily armed warships halfway across the planet to form an allied boarding and interdiction force. And finally, we will dismantle the overland illusion, exposing exactly why pipelines from Russia and Myanmar can never, ever replace the sheer volume of a maritime energy supply. Let us begin by looking at the most critical, vulnerable, and terrifying geographic reality facing the Chinese Communist Party today: the Achilles heel of a superpower. To truly appreciate the existential terror that grips the strategic planners in Beijing, you must discard the propaganda of their military parades and look exclusively at a spreadsheet detailing their national energy consumption. The People's Republic of China is an industrial titan. It is the manufacturing floor of the entire world. It possesses the largest population, the largest standing army, and the largest surface navy on the face of the earth. But this colossal, continent-spanning leviathan suffers from a fatal, incurable genetic defect. It is fundamentally, hopelessly addicted to foreign energy. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil. Despite massive domestic investments in coal, hydroelectric, and renewable energy, the transportation sector, the heavy manufacturing sector, and most importantly, the mechanized apparatus of the People's Liberation Army (PLA), run exclusively on refined liquid fossil fuels. Fighter jets require JP-8 aviation fuel. Main battle tanks require diesel. Aircraft carriers and guided missile cruisers require marine diesel or bunker fuel. Without an unceasing, massive oceanic river of imported oil, the Chinese war machine becomes a collection of incredibly expensive stationary steel statues. And here is the geographical reality that keeps Xi Jinping awake at night. Over 70% of China's imported crude oil, and a massive percentage of its liquefied natural gas (LNG), originates in the Middle East and Africa. To get from the ports of Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Angola to the refineries on the eastern seaboard of China, that energy must transit the Indian Ocean. And to exit the Indian Ocean and enter the South China Sea, it must pass through the Indonesian archipelago. In 2003, the then-president of China, Hu Jintao, publicly acknowledged this vulnerability, coining a phrase that has defined Chinese grand strategy ever since: the Malacca Dilemma. The Strait of Malacca, bordered by Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, is a 500-mile-long geographic bottleneck. It is the primary artery of global trade. An estimated 16 to 20 million barrels of oil pass through this strait every single day. If you are a Western naval commander looking for a way to cripple the Chinese economy and neutralize their military without ever launching an airstrike against the Chinese mainland, you do not look at Beijing. You look at Malacca. The mechanics of the countdown timer. Let us wargame the implementation of the Distant Blockade. A high-intensity conflict breaks out in the Pacific. The United States and its allies immediately declare a maritime exclusion zone across the primary Indian Ocean choke points: the Strait of Malacca, the Sunda Strait, and the Lombok Strait. Allied naval forces, utilizing advanced satellite surveillance, maritime patrol aircraft, and automated identification systems (AIS), begin tracking every single commercial vessel approaching the archipelago. Any very large crude carrier (VLCC) or container ship bound for a Chinese port is intercepted. They are ordered to drop anchor or turn around. If they refuse, Allied special forces execute hostile boarding operations via fast roping from helicopters or approaching in rigid hull inflatable boats (RIBs). The ships are seized, their crews are detained, and the cargo is confiscated as contraband of war. If an adversary attempts to run the blockade using military escorts, those escorts are engaged and sunk by Allied submarines and land-based anti-ship missiles. The moment the blockade is established, the physical flow of oil into China drops by an estimated 70% overnight. This triggers an immediate, apocalyptic shockwave across the Chinese mainland. China, like all major powers, maintains a Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR. While the exact capacity of their SPR is a closely guarded state secret, Western intelligence estimates suggest it holds anywhere from 90 to 120 days of net imports. A 120-day countdown timer has just been started on the survival of the Chinese state. Within the first 30 days, the Chinese government is forced to implement draconian, wartime rationing. All civilian air travel is grounded. Private vehicle usage is banned. The diesel required to transport food from the agricultural interior to the massive megacities on the coast is strictly curtailed. The manufacturing sector, completely starved of energy and raw materials, grinds to a catastrophic halt, triggering mass unemployment and internal civil unrest. By day 60, the military impact becomes undeniable. The PLA Navy, attempting to fight a high-intensity naval war against the United States in the Philippine Sea, realizes it cannot refuel its massive armada of destroyers and frigates. The supply of specialized aviation fuel for the J-20 stealth fighters begins to run dry. By day 90, the Chinese military is mathematically paralyzed. They possess the weapons but they lack the chemistry to deploy them. The distant blockade is the ultimate asymmetric weapon. It forces China to fight on a ticking clock, draining their national lifeblood drop by drop, while the Western alliance sits safely thousands of miles away, controlling the valve. The myth of the Russian lifeline. When Western analysts discuss the vulnerability of the Malacca Dilemma, critics and pro-Beijing commentators frequently point to the map and argue that China has already solved this problem. They point to the massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. They argue that China has diversified its energy imports away from the vulnerable maritime domains and secured unblockadable, overland routes from friendly or compliant neighbors. They point to the sprawling network of oil and gas pipelines connecting the Chinese mainland to the Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, and the deep-water port of Kayakbiu in Myanmar. They argue that if the West blocks the Strait of Malacca, China will simply turn to Vladimir Putin and import all the energy it needs across the endless, secure expanse of the Eurasian steppe. This argument is a masterclass in geographical illiteracy and mathematical delusion. Let us look at the brutal, unvarnished physics of fluid dynamics and pipeline capacity. Pipelines are incredibly expensive, technologically complex, and notoriously slow to build. They also possess a fixed, absolute maximum capacity. You cannot simply turn a dial and double the amount of oil flowing through a 48-inch steel pipe. It is constrained by the physics of pressure, the capacity of the pumping stations, and the viscosity of the crude oil itself. Currently, the most significant overland artery supplying China is the Eastern Siberia Pacific Ocean (ESPO) pipeline, which connects the Russian oil fields directly to refineries in Daqing, China. At its absolute maximum, optimal operating capacity, the ESPO pipeline can deliver approximately 600,000 to 800,000 barrels of oil per day. Let us be generous and round that up to 1 million barrels per day. China also receives oil via a pipeline crossing through Kazakhstan, which delivers roughly 200,000 to 400,000 barrels per day. And finally, there is the highly touted Sino-Myanmar pipeline. This pipeline was explicitly built by Beijing to bypass the Strait of Malacca. It allows oil tankers to dock on the coast of Myanmar in the Bay of Bengal, and pump the oil directly across the jungle and into the landlocked Chinese province of Yunnan. The maximum capacity of the Myanmar pipeline is roughly 440,000 barrels per day. The mathematical reality of the sea. Now let us combine all of those overland pipelines. At absolute maximum capacity, assuming zero maintenance issues, zero sabotage by rebel groups in Myanmar, and perfect operational efficiency, the combined overland pipeline network can deliver roughly 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil to China every single day. 2 million barrels. Now, let us return to the mathematics of the sea. A single very large crude carrier, VLCC, just one ship, holds 2 million barrels of oil. Every single day prior to a conflict, China imports between 10 to 11 million barrels of crude oil. The vast majority of that, over 8 to 9 million barrels, arrives by sea. To replace the volume of oil that is transported through the Strait of Malacca by maritime shipping, China would need to construct 5 more ESPO pipelines, spanning thousands of miles across frozen Siberian tundra and treacherous mountain ranges. That is a multi-decade, multi-trillion-dollar engineering feat that is physically impossible to execute in the middle of a high-intensity war. The overland pipelines are a rounding error. They are a supplementary luxury in peacetime. In a wartime blockade scenario, they are a trickle of water in a burning desert. They might provide just enough fuel to keep the lights on in the Forbidden City, but they are mathematically incapable of sustaining the energy demands of a 1.4 billion person economy and a mobilized, continental military apparatus. The overland illusion is exactly that, an illusion. China is a maritime-dependent nation, and if the West controls the sea, the West controls China's survival. The geographic warden of the Indian Ocean. If the strategy is to execute a distant blockade, the next logical question is, where do you stage the forces required to enforce it? You cannot execute a blockade of the Indonesian archipelagos from naval bases in San Diego or Hawaii. They are thousands of miles too far away. You need a sovereign, untouchable staging ground located directly adjacent to the choke points, capable of sustaining massive, relentless military operations. You need Australia. But you do not just need the Australian mainland. You need to push the perimeter of the fortress out into the deep water of the Indian Ocean. This brings us to one of the most critical, highly classified, and heavily militarized geographic pivots of the 21st century, the Cocos, Keeling Islands. Look at a map of the Indian Ocean. Approximately 2,700 kilometers northwest of the Australian mainland, and roughly 1,000 kilometers southwest of the Indonesian island of Java, sits a tiny, isolated coral atoll known as the Cocos Islands. It is sovereign Australian territory. For decades, it was nothing more than a tropical paradise, known for its pristine beaches and a tiny population of a few hundred people. It had a small, civilian airstrip used for commercial flights and emergency medical evacuations. But as the geopolitical threat from China expanded, the strategic planners in Canberra and Washington looked at the Cocos Islands and realized they were staring at a gold mine. The Cocos Islands sit perfectly, squarely, astride the primary maritime approaches to the Sunda Strait, the Lombok Strait, and the Strait of Malacca. It is the ultimate unsinkable aircraft carrier. It is the geographic warden of the Eastern Indian Ocean, the $400 million runway. Recognizing this unparalleled strategic value, the Australian Department of Defence is currently executing a massive, multi-hundred million dollar upgrade of the military infrastructure on the Cocos Islands. They are heavily reinforcing, widening, and expanding the single runway. They are pouring deep, military-grade concrete designed specifically to bear the immense structural footprint of the heaviest, most sophisticated maritime patrol aircraft on the planet, the Royal Australian Air Force (RAF) Boeing P-8A Poseidon. The P-8 is not just a surveillance plane, it is a heavily armed, flying server room. It is the apex predator of the ocean. By basing a rotating detachment of P-8 Poseidons on the Cocos Islands, the Australian Defence Force fundamentally alters the geometry of the Distant Blockade. A P-8 taking off from the Cocos Islands does not have to burn hours of fuel transiting from the Australian mainland. It is immediately on station. It can cover the entire eastern expanse of the Indian Ocean. It can loiter for hours over the approaches to the Sunda and Lombok Straits. If the Chinese Navy realizes that the Strait of Malacca is blockaded by Allied surface ships, their only alternative is to attempt a desperate high-risk breakout. They would order their fleet of nuclear-powered attack submarines, SSNs, like the Type 093, to dive deep, transit covertly through the deep water trenches of the Lombok Strait, and attempt to break out into the Indian Ocean to hunt Allied supply ships or harass the blockade force from behind. But the Australian anvil is waiting for them. The P-8 Poseidons launching from the Cocos Islands would blanket the straits with a dense, inescapable web of sonobuoys. These air-dropped, highly sensitive acoustic sensors would listen for the faint, distinct mechanical noises of the Chinese submarines attempting to sneak through the choke point. The P-8 utilizes advanced magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD, to sense the massive steel hull of the submarine disrupting the Earth's magnetic field. Once detected, the P-8 does not need to call for backup. It simply opens its internal weapons bay, drops a Mk-54 lightweight torpedo, and annihilates the Chinese submarine before it ever reaches the open water. Furthermore, the expansion of the Cocos Islands includes the infrastructure to support advanced autonomous underwater vehicles AUVs, like the Australian-designed Ghost Shark. These massive, robotic submarines can be deployed from the islands to map the seabed, conduct persistent, covert surveillance of the straits, and act as intelligent, mobile minefields. By weaponizing the Cocos Islands, Australia ensures that the back doors to the Indian Ocean are permanently locked, deadbolted, and guarded by the most advanced anti-submarine warfare network on the planet. They are the anvil against which the Chinese Navy will be crushed. The boarding party problem. We have established the geographic choke points, the inescapable mathematical reality of China's oil dependence, and the Australian aerial and subsurface anvil waiting in the Indian Ocean. But enforcing a distant blockade against a global superpower requires more than just dropping sonobuoys from airplanes. A blockade requires physical mass. If you are going to stop, inspect, and turn back thousands of massive commercial supertankers, container ships, and bulk carriers attempting to run the blockade, you cannot do it with a fighter jet. You cannot do it with a submarine. You need surface ships. You need heavily armed, highly capable destroyers and frigates carrying elite naval special warfare operators capable of executing hostile boarding operations. You need the sheer, undeniable presence of naval tonnage. This presents a massive logistical problem for the United States Navy. In a high-intensity conflict with China, the U.S. Pacific Fleet will be entirely consumed by the kinetic, brutal fight in the first island chain. The American carrier strike groups, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and the Virginia-class submarines will be fighting desperately to protect Taiwan, secure the airspace over the Philippine Sea, and dismantle the Chinese A2/AD missile networks. The United States Navy simply does not possess the spare hull numbers to fight a massive high-intensity war in the Western Pacific while simultaneously maintaining a comprehensive, watertight blockade of the Indian Ocean thousands of miles to the west. The U.S. Navy needs help. They need a massive influx of Allied surface combatants to hold the line in the Indian Ocean while the Americans fight the kinetic war in the Pacific. Why Europe is sailing east? This is the exact reason why the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, an alliance historically obsessed with the defense of the European continent and the containment of Russia, is suddenly aggressively pivoting its massive naval weight toward the Indo-Pacific. For the last several years, the adversaries of the free world watched in confusion as European navies executed unprecedented long-range deployments to the other side of the planet. We saw the British Royal Navy deploy its carrier strike group, led by the massive 65,000-ton HMS Queen Elizabeth, on a grueling multi-month deployment through the Indian Ocean and into the South China Sea. We saw the French Marine Nationale deploy nuclear attack submarines, amphibious assault ships, and advanced multi-mission frigates from their sovereign bases in Reunion Island and New Caledonia to patrol the Indonesian archipelagos. We saw the German Navy send the Baden-Württemberg-class frigate Bayern, and later the Frankfurt am Main, sailing directly through the contested waters of the Taiwan Strait. We saw Italy and the Netherlands dispatch their own advanced surface combatants to participate in massive live-fire multinational exercises off the coast of northern Australia. Beijing and Moscow frequently mock these deployments as hollow political theater. They argue that Europe is a declining power, completely incapable of fighting a sustained war in Asia. They argue that European ships are just showing the flag to appease Washington, and that in a real war Europe would retreat back to the Mediterranean. This is a catastrophic failure of strategic analysis by the authoritarian regimes. NATO is not deploying to the Indo-Pacific to fight a kinetic ship-to-ship war against the Chinese Navy in the Taiwan Strait. They are not there to conduct amphibious landings on the beaches of the South China Sea. NATO is deploying to the Indo-Pacific to serve as the hammer of the Distant Blockade. The European navies possess exactly what the Distant Blockade requires: massive, highly capable blue water surface combatants. If a war erupts, the British, French, German, Italian, and Dutch navies do not need to sail into the teeth of the Chinese hypersonic missile network. They simply need to sail into the Indian Ocean, link up with the Royal Australian Navy, and form an impenetrable wall of Allied steel across the western approaches to the Sunda, Lombok, and Malacca Straits. A British Type 45 destroyer with its advanced Samson air defense radar can provide an impenetrable umbrella of protection over the blockade force. A French frigate carrying highly trained Commando Hubert naval special forces can execute aggressive, non-compliant boarding operations against rogue supertankers attempting to smuggle oil to China. The European powers are perfectly suited for this mission. It leverages their historic maritime pedigree, their massive combined naval tonnage, and their ability to sustain expeditionary operations from Allied logistical hubs like Diego Garcia, Duckman, Oman, and Fleet Base West in Perth, Australia. By committing to the enforcement of the Distant Blockade, NATO frees up the United States Navy to concentrate entirely on the kinetic high-end fight in the Pacific. They act as the ultimate strategic force multiplier. They ensure that the tourniquet applied to the Chinese economy is absolutely watertight, heavily armed, and backed by the combined economic and military might of the entire industrialized Western world. The narrative of an inevitable apocalyptic clash of fleets in the South China Sea is an incomplete picture of modern warfare. It assumes that the free world will fight the enemy where the enemy is strongest. The strategic brilliance of the Distant Blockade is that it refuses to play by Beijing's rules. It weaponizes the undeniable, inescapable reality of geography against the adversary's greatest vulnerability. The Chinese Communist Party has spent decades and trillions of dollars building an incredible, terrifying military machine. They have built stealth fighters, hypersonic glide vehicles, and massive aircraft carriers. But all of that terrifying hardware is completely, utterly useless without the refined liquid fossil fuels required to power it. By turning the Indian Ocean into a sovereign kill zone, Australia provides the anvil. By aggressively expanding the runway and anti-submarine capabilities of the Cocos Islands, the Royal Australian Air Force ensures that the back doors to the Pacific are permanently locked. By deploying their massive blue water surface fleets to the region, NATO and the European powers provide the hammer. They ensure that the maritime exclusion zone is enforced by a wall of heavily armed, technologically supreme warships capable of turning back the massive commercial fleets that sustain the Chinese economy. The Malacca trap is the ultimate strategic paradox. It proves that the West can win a total high-intensity war in the Pacific without ever launching a single kinetic strike against the Chinese mainland. They simply have to close the gate, drop the steel curtain across the Indian Ocean, and wait for the adversary's empire to suffocate under the weight of its own energy addiction. The geography of starvation is absolute. The overland pipelines are an illusion. The Australian anvil is forged. And the NATO hammer is ready to fall. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that the Western Alliance possesses the political will to enforce a total maritime blockade against China, knowing it would plunge the entire global economy into a severe depression? Or is the distant blockade a theoretical concept that politicians would be too terrified to execute in reality? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay relentless, and we'll see you in the next one.